My name is David Scott. I'm the Chief Executive Officer and President of Polar Knowledge Canada, which is a small, relatively new federal agency. We report to the Minister of Northern Affairs, and Yvonne Jones is the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Northern Affairs. She was here yesterday. So we're not part of the Minister's Department. We're a separate agency, which gives us a little bit more flexibility than the mothership, as we call it, the big department that our Minister leads. Our prime asset is the Canadian High Arctic Research Station in Cambridge Bay, Nunavut. It's about 850 kilometers north of Yellowknife. It's about an hour-and-a-half flight to get there, and it is a wonderful, welcoming community of 2,000 people in Cambridge Bay. Our main currency is knowledge, creation of new knowledge, interpretation of existing knowledge, and mobilizing that knowledge into the hands of Northerners to make better informed decisions. Our main focus of inquiry is how the Northern climate is changing and what that means for Northerners. We create some knowledge ourselves with our own research staff. We have a grant and contribution program that funds many other Canadian-based researchers. And at the campus, we work closely in partnership with researchers from more than 15 different countries. Our most frequent international visitors are from South Korea. We also have researchers from Japan and India, European countries, as well as the US, so quite a range of folks. One of the areas that we always emphasize is the inclusion of existing Indigenous knowledge. Indigenous people have been living in Canada's north from Labrador through to the Yukon and have accumulated centuries and in fact millennia of knowledge. That knowledge is dynamic, it changes with the times, and our value proposition is that by working with Indigenous knowledge holders on questions that they have about their changing environment, working together with university-based or Western scientists, combining those ways of knowing is most likely to give us the best new knowledge that everyone, first and foremost Northerners, but everyone can benefit from that new knowledge. So that's a little bit about us as Polar Knowledge Canada. With that knowledge creation and innovation in mind, we're going to present something quite different from all of the previous conversations. So be prepared to open your minds to hear about some new ideas and new things that are happening where new knowledge is being created in ways that will ideally benefit Northerners as well as others. We're going to start with Stephen Mooney, who is the Interim Dean of Applied Science. He's an entrepreneur by nature, I would say, and he leads the Northern Housing Innovation element at Yukon College, soon to be Yukon University. He'll be followed by Commander Meiz, who has intervened on a few occasions and I think is already showing his enthusiasm for some very innovative, creative ways of mobilizing things in ways we haven't thought about. He'll be followed by Sandeep Taxali, who's the Director of Public-Private Partnerships at OneWeb, which is looking to dramatically change the connectivity of the planet, not just the Arctic. And finally, we'll have Dr. Paul Barrette, who is from the National Research Council of Canada, and he'll be describing some innovations in ice road technologies. So, without further ado, I'll introduce Stephen.
Thank you, Dave. So as Dave said, Yukon College, soon to be Yukon University. It's been about a 5-year road trip so far. The commissioner will proclamate the new law in the next few weeks, and then May 9th, we officially become Yukon University. So I'm here today to talk about innovation and what we've done as a small college in support of communities and bringing technology and innovation into the north. So if we could start the slides. So first off the bat, in the communication world, this is Northwest Tel. This is one of their terrestrial microwave sites. We worked with them to integrate. It's a cogeneration site where they have the hardware runs on batteries. When the batteries draw down, a diesel generator fires up. We help them intercept this with a solar array. And this array, you're looking at a site that's north of the Arctic Circle here, and fuel's about $6 a liter once you airlift it to that site. So when we intercept with the solar, the diesels fire up less. There's a 2.5-year payback on this investment on these solars. Next slide, please. So one thing that's unique about this, now this is Old Crow, again, our only fly-in community in the Yukon. This is a 640 kilowatt array. Again, flying community, it's a diesel generated community for our electricity. Well, what's very unique about this is working with the communities, the elders said, we've got a great spot for you to put this, but we want you to protect our cranberries. And the engineers worked on this, and these panels actually faced east-west. And so if you know anything about solar, you want stuff facing south. But the design of this and the latitude that they're at, where you want to get the maximum gain of solar energy, it is during the summertime. And so this, and the next slide, please. And so this is the airstrip in Old Crow, the Old Crow River in the background, and 640 kilowatts that, and you can see the shadow going to the right of it and the sun's coming around. So during the summer solstice, that sun will be spinning around. And for the first time, these diesels will be turning off in this community and using solar only. Next slide, please. So I'm going to fly through these. So biomass. In the Arctic, the Yukon is spoilt because we have trees all over the Yukon. There are sections above the tree line, but even willows we're working with Old Crow to look at willows as a form of biomass, chipping them up and using them to heat and electrify their community. So this is a technology from Finland that we brought to the Yukon. This is a combined heat and power unit. So with wood chips, we can gasify with this unit, gasify the wood chips and put that into a diesel engine and use it to turn make electricity, and out of that jacket we can pull off 100 kilowatts of thermal along with 40 kilowatts of electrical. So small communities, 3 or 4 of these could run 10, 15 homes with administration buildings and such. Next slide, please. So super high-end technology. Jan Valonis from Stockholm, his group is looking at nuclear batteries. And this is something that is very impressive because as a battery, depending how much you draw from that, you can have, with this battery in particular, you can range it from 3 megs to up to 10 megs. And if a small community like Old Crow had this, they could have this thing running at about 2.5 megs, and they could get 35 to 40 years of battery of energy life in that community. So now the other benefit that lead cold isn't really promoting is the fact that with nuclear, the conversion of the steam to electricity is about 6 to 7 times the ratio. So if you had this battery, the CCAN, 40-foot CCAN buried in a small community, you could run heating and district heating off this to heat and electrify your community for 30 to 40 years. Next slide, please. So in the mining reclamation, we have a chair in mining restoration that sits at Yukon Research Center. And what we've done is looked at passive techniques of pulling heavy metals out of mine tailings. And the passive is using gravity. But one thing about finding the right ingredients is working with the communities. And we were looking for a sulfate-based plant. And when I say that, I could give you the Latin term, but when we speak to the communities, it's, do you have any swamps around here? Do you have any swamps that stink? And the elders go, oh yeah, we got one. And this is in Kino. And they're we went to a local swamp, found the sulfates, extracted the DNA, and are now using that substrate to pull out arsenics and heavy metals out of the mine tailings that's within that area. And it's a passive treatment. Now, this is where mining companies get giddy because you don't need energy to use that. It's gravity fed, and so we're working with that concept and actually pulling heavy metals out of a Kino mine site right now. Next slide, please. So we're going to talk about roads and my friend from the NRC. This is a classic Dawson City, home of the Klondike. You can see the front street with that wagon being buried. Dawson is completely covered in permafrost. These buildings sit on permafrost. This permafrost in particular is right now at minus 0.5 degrees Celsius below freezing. It's a half a degree away from melting. So, and there's 80-foot lenses of ice under some of these buildings. So climate change has been messing with us and increasing that temperature of permafrost. Permafrost is great if you don't let it thaw. This is thawing. And so we've come up with, another thing about Dawson City, it's a part of the historic parks of Canada. So everything, every building, every infrastructure has to be of the turn of the century. So we worked with the highways, worked with the city, and they wanted, this is the first street paved in Dawson because this place just turns to mud when it rains. So we brought in the traditional paving gear, and you see that asphalt layer. But what we put on top is we worked with a French company and created this higher pigmented asphalt that is lighter in color. And this brown that you see in the slide to the right is the actual color of the dirt in Dawson. And so when you walk in Dawson and you walk on the side streets up to Front Street, people don't even realize that they're going from a dirt road into a into a pavement situation. But what this does is bounces the albedo, the sunlight, off the pavement, so it doesn't absorb heat and is keeping this Front Street from melting. So next slide, please. So a Yukon innovation, compost. Our landfills in the north are filling up. We actually blast holes in the ground to build landfills. One thing that this, he's an agricultural engineer in Whitehorse, came to us and had this idea of removing plastics from compost. So you can compost things in the north, but when you see even landfills down here in the south, a ton of plastic, a ton of garbage is mixed with that compost. So he's developed a machine, and it fits on a trailer, and you bring it to a site, roll it out, and those 3 conveyor belts. You throw in the disgusting compost with diapers and plastic bottles and those blue bags that say they are compostable, but they are not. And this machine vibrates it. We took the technology from the gold mining industry, vibrating of a jig, and with air, he can clean out 99.7% of the plastic out of compost. He's building these for small communities around the world right now, and I think this is going to save a lot of the landfill in the Arctic. Next slide, please. So one of my topics that I'm working on now is, in conjunction with the Carcross-Tagish Management Corporation, is looking at a housing innovation factory. And this is combining applied research, social innovation, and building a housing factory in the Yukon that will have no barriers for entry for First Nations citizens to come in and learn about house building, and bringing that education all the way from 0 level through to PhDs doing applied research and building science to make northern housing better, and feeding that back into the factory. But the whole goal is to take citizens from the communities, bring them into Whitehorse, teach them about housing systems, teach them what a wall system is, a floor system, a heating system, build all this in a controlled environment so that we can teach them, and then work with them back in the community to build new houses for them. And after they build those houses, then they'll become the house maintainers, but also the go-to people that we need to fix the existing housing stock in the north. And those jobs are incredibly valued in the communities. And in the past 30, 40 years, we've been building houses and giving keys away. And that doesn't work. People don't understand how a house is a system, how you manage and operate a house. And the north is especially hard on buildings. And so having this knowledge at the citizen level back into that community, we feel this is one of the best ways to have value in a citizen, but giving them a great job, but feeling valued in the community and keeping what they need, housing stock, healthy. But working with communities, last slide please. Innovation does have a downside, and the downside is you need community involvement. You cannot come into a community and say, hey, we've got this technology for you, here it is. I'll give you a 90% chance of failure by doing that. Going into a community and saying, hey, we're here to collaborate with you. What can we do together to make this community better? And what are your issues in the community? Then you'll see this. And so this was a quote from an elder in Tuktoyaktuk, and this is a classic. You know, if you jump into a community and give them technology and then take off, like we've been doing with housing for 30 years and giving them keys and then running away, it doesn't work. But if you involve them, educate them, work with them, and they will understand and they will succeed. So I'll jump in the panel and we'll take questions after. Thank you.
Good morning, thanks for having me. A bit of background, if you're unaware, the Canadian Navy, Royal Canadian Navy, is building 6 Arctic offshore patrol ships. The check was given to us, basically before we even had the idea we wanted them. But it's actually a bit of a blessing in disguise because we view all these items as security. So what I'm going to talk about our innovation program, our technical innovation program, but also within the lens, and I've teased out a lot of the sort of initiatives we're working on that we felt were germane to this audience. So first up, what is the Naval Technical Innovation Program? Well, essentially, when our new policy came out, the word innovation was in it a gajillion times. And everybody formed innovation clubs. But what ended up happening, essentially, was a lot of people were doing a lot of these presentations. Okay, and so there was a lot of tap dancing done on stage, but when we were reporting back as to who was actually executing innovations and actually even money spent, we didn't have much to show for it. So we said, let's go to the procurement branch and actually innovate inside the procurement branch of how we're gonna bring people together. Okay, so what we've devised is basically, imagine a bike lock, okay? And in order for, and people always ask me, what's your process? There is none, it's a bike lock. You have to figure out the right procurement modality, the right company to deal with, the right testing area, and then they're always different. But once you unlock that, then you can actually execute an innovation. Okay, so that is in essence the Naval Technical Innovation Program, and I'll get to how we've organized ourselves. So first off, we purchased an innovation management system, and basically we democratized it. So a lot of people were always coming at us with PDFs and, hey, I got this product and this idea and so on and so forth, and it was frankly becoming too much to manage inside our inbox. So what we did instead, and we started with an Excel spreadsheet and then we went pro. Planbox is a company out of Montreal, and basically we set up our innovation management portal, which I would invite to anybody who, we'll see, I don't know what the real rules are, but I would love for everybody even in this room to pitch ideas to us and be part of our Planbox system. But you can offer challenges, ideas, and basically join the team too, because what we also found is some people had no ideas. They just wanted to help out and roll up their sleeves. Oftentimes we had companies who had solutions, all right? And sometimes they thought they knew our solutions and our problems, but when we matched them with 2 or 3 companies together, it wasn't even 5 or 10 times greater. It was honestly 1,000 times. So my rule of thumb when I actually sponsor a project or an innovation initiative is a gross margin of 300% return on investment. If I'm going to put graphene paint on a bottle of a hull, I showed that $1 million investment is probably going to have a 300% return, or else I don't bother, frankly. Or we don't feel as if. But we're going to test everything, but then that's how we actually sponsor it down the road. Okay, so that's our portal. So I told you a bunch of innovation clubs happened, and so to the left of that dotted line was just Excel spreadsheets. Then we got ourselves organized. We capture everything, we verify it, so we actually go kick the tires, okay? And from that, if something boils to the surface, we sponsor it. And by sponsor it, what we really meant is, did it meet one of my 3 criteria? Did I have a testing department? My fleet diving unit on the West Coast? I need something all right? That I actually have somebody who wanted to run it, that I actually have a company, that I actually have a funding feasibility, a potential of funding, okay? And that's when I say sponsored. Go figure out the rest. Planned is actually go figure out the rest, all right? So it's not planning in the sense of how is the testing gonna occur, but really how are we gonna get this to shovel ready? It almost sounds like the mining industry, frankly, all right? You know, that first $100 million. Then we have in progress, and you can see right here is so when we first started from 2018, basically our baby's a year old now, frankly, okay, this program, and how we've actually evolved from the amount of ideas. So in my backlog now today, as of 28th January, I have 2, somebody didn't do their homework, that are just recently captured, okay, 134 that have been verified, that I can just go and pick out. I have 22 that are sponsored that I said go. 1 that is being planned, and there's more than 1 right now, between planned and in progress. 12 in progress, 6 implemented, and closing. And closing, we spoke about knowledge management. So oftentimes we find out, oh, we tried that in 96 and blah, 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 and people forget because it was in somebody's inbox somewhere. So we created a body of knowledge to actually retain it. So selfishly, because our capital procurement process states that you really need about 10 to 14 years to do a project. But oftentimes, if you want to short fuse that, we call it options analysis in the government procurement. So instead, oh yeah, 96, we did it. You know, not done. So we're creating a bank of knowledge to justify why we wanted our speed of procurement. So even short fusing that process too as well. Next one. As I mentioned, we democratized it. So when we first purchased PlanBox, essentially it took us between April 19 and October to develop the guts of the tool. So you can see that chart right there. And then basically we opened it up, and we're still in beta, meaning that I really have about roughly now 213 active users. I have 10,000 licenses of people giving ideas and really collaborating with it, all right? And it almost looks like LinkedIn meets Facebook for ideas, the actual insides of PlanBox. So we really want to democratize that, and you can see the breakdown between D&D, OGDs, industry and academia. And it's funny enough, you know, industry has not been shy. That actually says, oh yeah, we got a product for this and that. That's a problem, didn't know. And they're super excited. And this is what we use, and maybe I'll get into it afterwards about the ITB benefits and industrial technology benefits and how people see themselves. Okay, next one. So just a quick snapshot of our portfolios. This is some of the ideas. So there's a picture, you know, there's a bunch of zoom ins. You can click on any one of them, and the next few slides I teased out the ones I thought were germane to this audience. And I characterize them in sort of categories. First, I want to start with energy sovereignty, because we are in the security business, both the Navy and the government too as well. But it's not always energy security. All right? Sorry, it's not hard kill that we call it, or hard kinetic security. And that's what people view of the Navies. That's like the last resort, frankly. Okay? So first off is energy security, energy sovereignty, and some examples over here. So top left is an electric rib, all right? That's on the hopper for one of our projects. Electric skidoo, right there. I think it does about 200 kilometers. Water rotor, so this one's actually funded, and it is not tied, but it's a slow-moving rivers, all right? And that system right there, they're very small footprint. They can be printed, and that is about 10 kilowatts. So each of them. So you can have an array, and it's made for slow moving, and it's made to not to be obstructive with wildlife. Right there's a parachute system, 200 kilowatts. All right. So what it does is it goes 300 meters up in the air, and it basically reefs on like parachutes do, and it creates a ton of energy. Bottom right is a huge Canadian success story. I hope in the future, Ballard. Okay, so Ballard fuel cells, and that is inside of a container. We would like to put that in the back of our ships, so when we're at hotel loads, so not moving, that we can actually turn that on when we're in anchor and actually not firing all the diesels. So that's the first step. But even this morning, when I get a lot of my updates, I saw there's a new cruise liner in, of all places, Norway, that is going to be fully hydrogen electric cryogenic. All right, it's going to be launched pretty soon, and that's a big deal. So I think it's coming, and we got to get ready for that. Next one, I want to talk about infrastructure sovereignty. So I've asked a lot of port-type questions, and it's because we have none really we can, go to. And I think there's really 3 deep water ports for the size of Canada, frankly, a third ocean. I'll talk about it in my mobility sovereignty, but top left is a company out of Campbell River, BC called Slipstream, and they're basically creating what we're hoping. I'm at the design stage with them, a surface effect vehicle. So you can see in the front, the air goes in, okay, and actually creates almost like a turbojet effect, and the thrust is like 1:8 ratio. So it actually moves quite fast, and I have videos. Another one, bottom left, is we want to create what we call the pop-up ports. Okay, so basically using, almost like the mining industry is doing, ports that are resilient in ice conditions, but actually could be extended to a bit more deep water because we don't have the capabilities to actually start dredging. And it really sounds, it's cumbersome to do that. When really we're not there permanently, it's not a permanent basis. We want to go in and out. So if we can fit stuff in a couple sea containers and have pop-up ports, that would be amazing. Top right is something we came up with probably almost 5 years ago. We call it the lily pad. Okay, and it's basically a souped-up barge that creates its own energy, but and we don't know what we want to do with it. It was just an idea, right? But basically having staging grounds in order to do so. This can go on land, on top of water, and essentially have communications for us, so a communication repeat, but also give us access and power unmanned vehicles, underwater vehicles too as well, because we know that we have an empty net right now, so to speak, in the underwater domain. Bottom right is an idea for disaster relief. It's a sea container that actually has two hoses, one for power and one for water. So an example I can give to you is when we did disaster relief in Haiti, all right, the amount of effort it took for us to go from a rib to a Zodiac to go ashore and just to bring bottles of water was a little bit different than what we can do if we have an AOPS ship that has 14.4 megawatts of power and unlimited water. That why don't we just reel a hose? And feasibility studies are saying we can do that. So in disaster relief, scenarios, including the north, including wherever we go, this is an easy fix. Just take the garden hose, 500-meter garden hose, literally. Next slide, please. Then we talk about mobility sovereignty. Okay. So we have a couple of projects on the go right now. So that one is the Slipstream there too, surface effect vehicle. And like I said, we're really pushing forward with the design right now, and I'm going to pretty much offer a challenge soon as mid-Feb. It's called the ISC, Innovation Solutions Canada. So any government agency can offer a challenge to the population to give me designs. And essentially, one of the designs we're hoping for is our mobility connectors. That's top left. Bottom left is actually ground vehicles that are amphibious, autonomous too, and essentially be a connector, a seashore connector if I have pallets, parts that I want to move. That's a Snow Goose Bravo, and that is actually an unmanned vehicle that can do about 500 pounds. That is a gyrocopter. And the other one, bottom left, I couldn't show the picture because they're very secretive. They just got their funding. Sky Canoe. It almost looks like a quadcopter. It does another 500 pounds to 400-kilometer range. All right, so I can drop life rafts. I can drop supplies, parts, and completely unmanned. It's already FAA approved, which is awesome for us. So we're working on that design too as well. I love that company out of Burnaby. And this is Arctos. You may have seen them around Alaska in the oil fields. Amazing success story internationally. They work in China, everywhere, but we haven't purchased any. All right. They want to retrofit it for hydrogen for us and also make it fit in the C-130 Herc aircraft, so air transportable too as well. So we can drop these anywhere. They do seashore connector. They are super robust, can go over ice banks. They are basically, you can even have accommodations inside too as well for life raft and rescue. Next one, please. Then we talk about resource sovereignty. A couple examples here. Top left is our Grocer project, and that's actually making food in the sea can. So this project in particular that we're working on contracting as we speak, and I can say that because it's through an innovation program too as well, so they were pre-approved. But essentially, it can feed 100 people 5 servings of veggies a day with 90% less water. Currently, Ottawa-based company, they're all over the Arctic right now, supposedly. And to the point they're like, Meiz, the order book is full and you're gonna have to wait. I was like, well, we're the federal government, come on. Top right, data center. Okay, it is a resource now. It's a consumable, all right? And so, the Arctic has cold weather. So if you actually had energy sovereignty, you can have data sovereignty now and actually have banks of data and even do data mining for cryptocurrency. And people are making money off of that in their basements. So just, food for thought if you had energy sovereignty too. And you're going to keep it cool. And the biggest, 80% of the energy demand is actually keeping those cryptocurrency mining stuff basically cold. Bottom left is LEAP. It is a miniaturized version of an auto gasification system. The intent of this design is actually to get it furnace size. So pop your garbage in, press a button, and actually get rid of your garbage, but also, guess what? Heat your home too as well. So we're working on that design. And lastly, and this is a company out of Montreal that we initially funded, but now we're looking into a greater prospect of using recycling water, getting the gray water out, the oil minerals out, and actually producing energy out of all that system. And that's what's called the true habitat there, total resource utilization. Okay, next one is industrial sovereignty. Okay, so you got resources now. You got energy, you got mobility. Now you have industrial sovereignty. And now you can print whatever you want. All right, so top left, this is from, wow, I forgot the name of that company. Anyways, they're printing a car. Okay, it's called Local Motors. There you go, out of Phoenix, Arizona. They're printing a car right now. I'd love to print ribs, right, and make them semi-disposable, or Zodiacs. Bottom left is actually a propeller being machined after being printed, and we're working with graphene-based companies to do that right now as we speak. One of them is a biking manufacturer that bends metal perfectly, and we said, could you make this for us? They're like, absolutely. All right, top right, and Nokia just gave me a pitch on this about 2 months ago. It's called the Conscious Factory, a factory in the box. You need to YouTube this. Basically a bunch of robots, you tell it what you want it to do, all right, and it makes chips for you. Our parts, our supply chain is ridiculous and is so tethered to getting parts in China, circuit cards, and this one you tell it, you give it the pre-programmed specs, and it will print you out these circuit cards. So now we're talking about different industries in the north too as well. All right, could you imagine with energy independence, you can actually have chip manufacturing if you have the cooling that's embedded, which I think is a pretty cool part. Next one. And lastly, now you have an you have an industry that you've created, and the next step is an information sovereignty. All right, so we just greenlit this one on top left. I can't show you pictures. I think it's awesome. Oceana. It ingests gobs of AI data. I'm talking hectabytes. And from that, and this is all on class, satellites data. And what it does is it fuses it and it looks at behaviors. So for instance, if I have a ship that shut off its AIS for whatever reason, I can probably guess that it's a narco ship or it's actually in distress, one or two. So it'll ping up and says, check out, look at this quadrant, and we zoom in. It can also act as Siri or Google Earth, but not like its own Oceana. Get me from here to here, Pond Inlet to somewhere else, predict the ice flow, predict the depth charts, all these uncertainties. And we're going to ingest that with our underwater data too as well. So that one was just greenlit Friday. Bottom left, we're actually we're going to kick it off in March, and it's our augmented reality maintainer. So right now, our crews of our AOPS are only going to be 50 people. Typically on a warship, we have 200 people. That means we're going to have a lot less technicians. So we're talking about teaching in northern strategies and whatnot. So essentially, we're going to have people back home at our shops and headquarters, all right? In their shops, saying, hey, here's the PDF to do the maintenance for this and this and that. And with our augmented reality goggles, and I ordered 40 of them. I don't know why I just told you guys that, but anyways. And essentially, we are going to be short fusing training. And so after a bit of repetition, and you see the person, it's augmented reality, the part shows up, it zooms in, it says, oh yeah, that part, take that card out of your box, and it really, you can do the maintenance. So augmented reality, and we're doing that as an offset for lack of technicians on board, frankly. Planbox is a success story, the innovation management platform. Top right is a boat security called Barnacle. And essentially, in this little piece of kit, you pop it on board, and on an app, it actually tests out your bilge, battery, and safety. And the guy, basically he did it for yacht companies, but we put it into the defense, and we cyber-secured it. Top right is called Marine Labs, and essentially they're very cheap marine buoys, and it's going to use AI and fuse all that data. So they're semi-disposable, all right, and basically you can pop them anywhere, and from that give you wave data, ice data. So a cheaper way to do ice buoy management. And bottom right, and this is semi-secret but not really, company out of Rockland Scientific. It's called Whiskers. What is Whiskers doing? It actually can do wake detection. So anything that was there 10 hours past can actually detect the disturbances in water. Why do we care for that? You can guess it, but also we're in partnership with Transport Canada for marine mammal tracking. So we're actually going to put that in Oceania too as well, that data, and actually know suggest where the no-go zones are, and we just don't want to hit stuff, frankly. All right, and keep marine mammal management, and this could have a whole offshoot in terms of fishing and whatnot, but that does wake homing. So I know I've talked a lot. Next slide, please. This is kind of our social media, how you log into Planbox, and the info is all there, including a QR code too. So that you kind of get a good sense of what we're actually working for. Another reason why we decide to democratize our ideation is essentially because people complain about, not complain, it's fair, it's law, it's competing for, real competition when it comes to government procurements. Well, here we said, you know what, we've been open the whole time, our ideas, right? But we would like to get the most innovative ideas, right? And that's kind of how we're approaching it too as well. It's always been open, all right? And I've gone to conferences and I've told people, here's a QR code, go ahead, all right? And so we're being very, very fair and open and transparent with that. Okay, so with that, that was it. Thank you.
Thank you, Meiz, and I'll have Sandeep introduce himself.
Amazing, those innovations. So I think with connectivity, we can even make those innovations even more formidable. So 1 second here. Just gotta fire up the laptop. Okay, so I'm Sandeep Taxali. I'm with OneWeb. I'm just curious, how many of you have heard of OneWeb? Okay. Well, in the next 10 minutes, you'll learn a lot more. And again, Sandeep Taxali, Director of Public-Private Partnerships. And so my role really involves developing new business models with multi-stakeholders to make sustainable business cases for broadband in the most remote rural areas. And so obviously Arctic is a key focus of ours. Next slide. So today the agenda is to talk about the company, OneWeb, talk about our network, our commercial strategy, and our support of sustainable development. Next slide. So executive summary, five major points. First, OneWeb will be the first operator to provide high-speed, low-latency services across the entire Arctic region, land, air, and sea. There's geostationary today, which reaches part of the Arctic, but we will have full coverage over the Arctic. There are some narrowband, low Earth orbiting satellite constellations today, but we have high-speed broadband. And we, again, have full coverage over the Arctic region. So point one. Point two, the inauguration of our commercial services starts next year with the Arctic region, with services being available during the middle of next year. Point three, our services involve both fixed and mobile services that target several markets. Most of them are relevant to the Arctic region: communities, enterprise, government, maritime, aviation, and military. We provide both direct-to-premise connectivity as well as backhaul services to fixed and mobile networks. Point four, we created an early adopter program called Icebreakers, pretty clever, which will offer free trials within the maritime market starting later this year and next year. And fifth, our services will help several of the UN Sustainable Development Goals, whether it's good health and well-being, quality education, innovation and infrastructure, a key theme of this conference, sustainable communities, and climate action. We recognize that increased commercial activity can threaten sustainable development, absent careful planning, monitoring, and enforcement. We also believe connectivity can help thwart those key risks while empowering stakeholders to advance economic and social development in a very responsible way. So 5 key points. Next slide. Okay, the company. Next slide. So OneWeb, our vision is to provide internet access to everyone and everywhere, thereby reversing the sad reality today that nearly half of the world's population remains offline. A particular focus of OneWeb is to connect schools. We know that terrestrial solutions cannot reach everyone economically, and even when they can, they're not always affordable. Our network will target these unserved and underserved populations with cost-effective services. We certainly recognize that there are other barriers to adoption, including the lack of digital skills, affordable devices, and local content. We recognize that achieving our vision will require support from local partners that can address some of those adoption challenges, but we're here to provide connectivity, access, and affordable access. Next slide. Quick stats about the company. We've raised, so we are a startup, but we've raised because we're not offering services, but it's a very expensive startup. We've raised $3.4 billion to date, and you'll soon hear of some new funding rounds to sort of complete our funding cycle. We have 500 people at OneWeb, over 500 people representing 35 countries, with headquarters in London and a large presence outside of DC in McLean, Virginia, where I'm based, with several smaller offices. Our constellation will involve 600 satellites. We've launched 6 satellites to date, and we have our first major constellation launch happening this Thursday in Kazakhstan. We leverage the Ku and Ka bands, and we have licenses for 6 gigahertz of spectrum. Next slide. So OneWeb actually started many years ago. As I mentioned, we're a startup and will be coming out to market next year. But we've been around for several years. The company was actually conceived several years ago when we secured our spectrum licenses. But I would say in 2018, 2019, and 2020 probably constitute the most pivotal years of OneWeb. As we continue to build and launch our satellites, which started last year. Again, we launched 6 satellites last year. We are actively deploying our ground network. And we will release our first versions of the user terminal, which will be the terminal that allows you to get the service, the connectivity, and that will be issued this year. We're starting to engage in customer trials later this year, and we are preparing and launching our commercial services for next year. So we're doing some demos later this year, and with technology trials starting early next year, and commercial services starting next year in 2021. Next slide. So this slide offers a snapshot about our network. Again, our constellation involves 650 satellites, over 12 orbital planes operating at 1,200 kilometers in altitude. Each satellite has 16 beams arranged in a Venetian blind pattern, as you can see from that drawing. Each beam is 1,600 kilometers in length and 65 kilometers in width. So slightly, it covers 100,000 kilometers, square kilometers in area. Each beam, so think about this, each beam will be over the user terminal as these satellites fly. I have a video in just a few minutes. They fly north to south or south to north, depending on what part of the Earth you're in. And each beam will fly over that user terminal in 11 seconds. So this means that with 16 beams, you have a user terminal looking at one satellite for about 3 minutes. So if you're watching a movie for an hour's worth of movie or a video, you would have had 20 satellites over your house, for example, or 320 beams. So there's a lot of switching happening between each beam and each satellite to keep that connectivity sustained. Pretty incredible technology. And again, as I mentioned, the terminals operate in the Ku band and the ground stations are in the Ka band. Next slide. Our satellite integrates with the internet core through a ground network. We have these satellite network portals all over the world to capture the signals from the satellites. We have 42 of those, including 3 in the Arctic region, 1 in Alaska, 1 in Greenland, and 1 in Svalbard, Norway. And these ground stations, Earth stations, use the Ku band to communicate with the satellites. And so that's a key part of our network. And each of those satellite network portals integrates with the fiber network to ensure that high-speed connectivity throughout the A to B from the time the data leaves your computer to the time when you get the data back to your computer. And low latency is a critical part. I'll talk more about our low latency in just a minute, but that is a key differentiator for a low Earth orbiting satellite constellation like ours. Just to move along. Next slide. These are examples of our user terminals. Right now we have 2 user terminals, a parabolic antenna and a portable flat panel antenna. The flat panel involves an active electronically scanned array terminal. The parabolic terminal can support speeds up to 195 megabits per second down, 33 megabits per second up, and the flat panel can do about 80 down and 6 up. Speaking of the Arctic, and where you have frigid conditions, these terminals can operate in conditions up to -40 Celsius. If the temperatures go below that, we can offer a heating module to the parabolic antenna, which has a motor, so that requires some temperature sensitivity. Next slide. So I'll get now to the video, which shows how our constellation.
The following animation shows components of the OneWeb system design. Unlike geostationary satellites that operate at an altitude of 36,000 kilometers, the OneWeb system operates at 1,200 kilometers, resulting in significantly lower latency and better system performance. Our system will provide full global coverage, which is shown here. The gateways are shown here in red. The teardrops moving around illustrate the OneWeb satellites in orbit, which will communicate with the gateway infrastructure for connection to the internet. End users will connect to the satellites via OneWeb user terminals. As satellites pass over users, the terminals, represented here by a white dot, will hand off connections between beams and then to the next approaching satellite. The resulting connection and connectivity will provide high-speed access, as shown in the download simulation here.
Video to show how the network operates. The picture I have here on the right, if you can just go right back, that's a snapshot over the Arctic region, so you can sort of see the number of satellites because many of them hover over the Arctic region as they're rotating around the polar orbits. So we'll have excellent coverage over the Arctic. Our commercial strategy. So we cover many market sectors. I've already sort of talked about them. For the sake of time, I'll quickly just go over government, cellular backhaul, enterprise, mobility, maritime, aviation, government, oil and gas. So various sectors, and I'll dive deeper into 3 of these. Next slide. So what is the value proposition of OneWeb? There are really 4. One is simple, fast deployment. For those of you who have worked with satellite technologies today, setting up a VSAT terminal and purchasing the services and managing the services can take quite a bit of time. OneWeb's business model is around real, simple, fast deployment. You don't need an engineering specialist, for example, to deploy the user terminal. It's going to be largely plug and play. Point 1. 2, it's cost effective. One of the challenges in purchasing service today, satellite services today, is some heavy CapEx, especially if you're a solution integrator. You may have to deploy a teleport, for example. Our business model revolves around a managed services concept. And so everything's sort of built into our network. We have a very sophisticated backend system that offers many digital applications. So a distribution partner can simply plug and play a user terminal, sign up customers, and you're ready to go with our backend IT system. And so very minimal CapEx. Another cost-effective strategy is that our distribution partners may want to charge by the gigabyte, very much like the world of cloud services. And so we have a system that allows you to basically track gigabytes as they're used and charge your customers as they consume them. So if you build a network and you have 50 schools and 25 of those schools for whatever reason are not using the internet, there's no charge for those premises. And so we can track usage at the user terminal level, which is pretty innovative in this sector. 3, performance. Latency is the key differentiation. Our end-to-end latency over the network is going to be about 50 milliseconds, in contrast to geo networks, which are 500 to 700 milliseconds. So that is a key differentiator. And that was the whole purpose behind having a LEO network versus a MEO or a GEO. High bandwidth, again, I wouldn't call it not the gigabytes of connectivity that some of you may get in urban areas, but speeds, service packages at the end of the day is how we market ourselves. Service packages will be like 20 down, 5 up, 50 down, 10 up, 100 down, 20 up. So it's going to be in megabits per second. But again, the potential is much more as we build and add more satellites to our current generation and our future generation of network. And And 4 is global coverage. We offer, again, exceptional coverage over the Arctic region. The only area that we don't cover is Antarctica, at least not now for this first generation, though we do have a point-to-point solution that can work down there, and we're actually working with the National Science Foundation and some others to at least consider a potential demonstration of connectivity down to South Pole Station. But that's in the works, but we pretty much have global coverage except for the South Pole. Next slide. So I want to talk about 3 segments: maritime, enterprise, and government. On maritime, I think we had a great discussion yesterday on some of the key demand drivers for shipping across the Arctic, and as well as some of the challenges. I think connectivity obviously takes advantage of all of those demand drivers and can help thwart the risk behind some of the challenges. For example, we talked about lower transit times, increased shipping activity, shipping out routes moving increasingly north, and pent-up demand for adventure explorer cruises. Those are all great. Connectivity can enable all of those. And we talked about some of the challenges with high insurance rates, a high percentage of uncharted waters, limited search and rescue support, and lack of clarity around regulation. All of those came up, and I think connectivity can help in all of those. For example, our bandwidth, 400 megabits per second per beam, means that even the busiest shipping lanes can obtain a quality experience with our first generation of satellites. Low latency enables real-time applications such as video conferencing and cloud services for mission-critical applications to work very efficiently for crew and first responders, for example. Our seamless coverage eases the planning process for our maritime distribution partners and ship owners. Our large constellation of satellites means zero downtime and no risk of being unconnected. We recently announced a partnership with Iridium to develop a combined service offering that can further ensure 99.999% availability. Our limited upfront investment, I think, unleashes for entrepreneurs in the maritime ecosystem further incentives to develop a connectivity solution for customized markets, because they can focus on the innovation and the technology and not worry about the upfront cost to join the network. So just some of the benefits of our network into the maritime sector. Next, Icebreakers Program. I mentioned that earlier today. It's a promotional program for our earliest adopters who will receive a 6-month trial of connectivity starting in 2021. The trial includes the hardware and full connectivity at no charge. The only cost for the participant will be hardware installation. It's available to all vessels engaged in Arctic research, environmental protection, green adventure cruise liners, and explorer yachts active in the Arctic region. So there's an email there, maritime@oneweb.net, or you can contact me during the conference, and I'll be sure to put you in touch with the people running this program. Next slide, our enterprise market and services. So we target many different enterprise verticals. Many of them are relevant to the Arctic community: large businesses, ports and business campuses, small businesses, gas stations and banks. We talked a lot about remote community banks, remote sites, research facilities and resorts, cellular backhaul, both small cell and large cell, community Wi-Fi, both the small villages and large villages, and IoT. So we pretty much have them all covered, and we provide prime internet connectivity as well as redundant solutions when you already have a network and you just want redundancy. We, again, provide backhaul to mobile and fixed wireless networks, and for IoT, I think the real differentiation is real-time communications as opposed to store and forward. Next slide, government community markets. So again, all of these markets are relevant to the Arctic community. Community institutions, schools, public computer centers, clinics, research facilities, both academia and corporate, security, drones and border surveillance, safety and emergency, search and rescue and first responders, defense and military, Air Force, ground forces, and the Navy Coast Guard. So again, basic premise connectivity, redundancy, mobile internet, backhaul to public safety networks, such as FirstNet in the United States, for example. Consumption-based services, so for example, think about a surveillance system and it's monitoring, and as soon as it sees video, then it triggers the network, or the connectivity goes on, and the person at the other end can determine exactly what's being what they found through the surveillance system, and only be charged for the gigabytes used for the communication of that content. So again, cost-effective in real time. Next slide. As far as our go-to-market strategy, again, we're as I mentioned, a company of 500 people. We work with distribution partners. We have to do that just to get the scale that we need for a global network and to get the expertise. And so we work with distribution partners in every country, in every region. That is our primary way to go to market. They could be telcos and MNOs. They could be new startup ISPs, new entrepreneurs. We welcome sort of everyone to that distribution partner community. When we do provide services to large MNOs, we may go direct, but generally we go through distribution partners. As I mentioned, and value-added resellers, so solution integrators. As I mentioned, we also have public-private collaboration, so we may work with a corporate partner, like Coca-Cola is one of our early investors actually, to do some CSR programs in Africa. We work directly with some national governments and help create special purpose vehicles to engage in, to help them achieve their national broadband plan, for example. But in the end, even that kind of a program would be implemented by a local partner. And we work with just many stakeholders. That's part of my job. I spend a lot of time with the different NGOs and IGOs and global institutions. Some of them are focused on capacity building. Some of them are focused on providing low-cost financing, debt financing or subsidies. It takes basically a village in many countries to make this all work, despite our cost-effective services. And I'm open to any new business models which will, in the end, lead to a sustainable service. Finally, I will just leave you with this slide, which talks about our commitment to sustainable development goals. And the way I look at connectivity is that it enables many of those goals. So it can promote good health and well-being, education, innovation, sustainable cities like I talked about, climate action, and partnerships. So we're very much involved with the UN. Actually, I head to a conference at UNICEF in a few days, and they have a really cool project called Project Giga. I would invite you to learn more about it, which is to bring connectivity to schools in both low-income countries as well as very unserved remote areas. And so they've got some really good ideas about how to scale connectivity at large, and we work with partners like that to think of ways OneWeb can fit into that ecosystem. So we're very much open to partnerships, and that's it. I'm happy to take questions later. Thank you.
I could present from here, if you don't mind. I'm not going to be very long. Yes, I'm going to follow up on Meiz's presentation, but getting more granular about the innovation concept from an internal perspective to NRC, that is. And I'm also going to be addressing an existing infrastructure, the winter road infrastructure in Canada. So firstly, a word on innovation. So every day we're using tools, devices, things that we take on a day-to-day basis, that many of them began as an innovation. Motor vehicle, the refrigerator, telephone, the potato peeler. At some point, someone asked the question, wouldn't it be nice to have something that does that for us? That's the question then, that it may eventually lead to a concept. Then following the concept, then you can get R&D if there's enough engagement. And then once R&D is applied, if it works out, R&D, research and development, does not always work, but if you don't try, you won't know. So that may lead, if successful, to prototype. Prototype testing, then you have your new feature. NRC is in the business of doing R&D. We're the largest federal R&D organization in Canada. So what I'm going to do now next is I'm going to say something about the winter road infrastructure and what NRC is doing to help stakeholders operating these structures. For the benefit of Southerners here who may not be aware of what a winter road is, I'll just summarize it very quickly. These were alluded to yesterday a few times. So it should not be confused with winter road maintenance, a very different notion. A winter road is only operational in the winter, as its name indicates, either a few weeks to a few months, depending of what operation we're talking about, and what year as well, nowadays, especially nowadays, given the warming climate. Outside that time window, the roads do not exist. So this is a very precious time window for communities to communicate with each other, to bring in bulk goods, fuel, and so on, which cannot be transported via air. Unless you have a lot of money, like industry does, communities cannot afford to do that. So it's very important to have them use these roads, make these roads usable for their benefit. The winter road goes over land and also over floating ice. The over ice segments are most vulnerable to a warming climate. They may actually be a weak link. So a road is as reliable as its weakest link. So what I should do now is I will mention something about this operation here. This picture was taken in 2012 by my colleague Ann Barker, who was leading the Arctic program. It is an operation that no longer exists, is the Tuck Ice Road that was replaced 2 years ago with an all-weather road. A winter road operator, constructor, will use that very nice flat surface whenever it's available, which is a frozen lake, a frozen river, or frozen sea, as long as it's safe, because there's only water below and sometimes the water is deep. Now, we seem to be having a problem there, maybe a breakthrough, I don't know, but there's a bypass next to it. But you can see the zone, the gray zone flooding. So with this, I'm going to show you an example, a couple of examples of concepts. So you can go to slide 2, please, Jennifer. So have a look at that. This is a concept that answers, or that tries to answer the question, how to guide decision-making about where available funding should be funneled. These operations lack funding, to be sure. And that's a recurrent comment when we speak with these people. I'm not talking about the industrial operations. They also have to pay for all that. Mostly from communities, from consulting with roads operators in Northern Ontario and government in the Northwest Territories. And that is an issue they're having. So what this tool would do is would provide a decision maker with a three-dimensional on computer, on screen that she can actually use to make those decisions. So we're talking about grade of the cross slope, the width of the road, the angle of turns, the foundation, ice thickness. It'd be geopositioning as well, if possible, with cameras and voice recorders and so on. All of this in a file accessible at a distance. It's a high TRL concept, technology readiness level. So that means that what you have over here is essentially off-the-shelf instrumentation put together into something that works. We're not doing any R&D for that. That is currently at the concept stage. So if you want to move to slide 3, please. Now that's a self-explanatory diagram. It's strengthening the ice, as I mentioned earlier. Ice, the over ice segments of roads tend to be the weak link. So what you're looking at here is means of introducing inside the ice a reinforcement that will prevent breakthrough and cracking. We are doing R&D on that. So next slide, 4, please. And that's an example of a slab that's not reinforced. That's what happens. We have done tests on slabs that have been reinforced with the material that are shown in slide 5. Steel cables and polypropylene grid. This work is funded by CERNAC and Transport Canada. This is the polypropylene grid could be a solution for the Dawson City Ice Bridge that we've investigated a couple of years ago, a river that does not want to freeze up. So those are different possibilities, but they have to be accepted. But first, we need the numbers to convince stakeholders that this works. They've been used in the past. Logs have been used in the past, especially by the private sector. But trees and branches and logs are not always available, and they're environmentally objectionable. So I'm going to finish off with this last slide, and that would be for you, Meiz. Custom made for you, following up your very interesting presentation. Don't be fooled. It is a drone, but it's a hovercraft to guide reconnaissance this is not to do with winter roads. This is for those of you who are interested more in the navigation aspects. Replaces helicopters, unmanned. There is a prototype existing. The Israeli military has one, and different payload, of course, 2 people. It would have to be adapted for this type of operation. So the advantage of having a hovercraft is that it's usually on hover mode, which is less energy, consumes less energy, but it would have to go through over ridges like it does over there, documenting its thickness to a fairly, to a good distance ahead of the ship for guidance purposes. So any concept that you might have, R&D is something we do, NRC can help as well, along with colleges like the Yukon College, Yukon University, and other organizations like that. So this is a nice forum to bring these ideas together. Don't leave it at a concept. You never know where it can get. So this is an invitation on behalf of NRC and behalf of colleges and universities to share ideas. Thank you.